My name is Kelvin Higo. I'm the chairman of the Japanese Cultural Show. We're here today at the Nikkei Memorial site. This memorial was first envisioned in 2017 in commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the removal of the Japanese Canadians from this community. Over 2,000 of these residents were removed in 1942, and the significance of this site is that the tram the original tram was located here, and this is where the 2,000 residents of Steveston left this community, but more importantly, they returned to this site. We're now entering into the memorial site. This memorial was designed by Joseph Fry and his team at HAPA Collaborative. And as they went through the community collaboration, they came up with 3 design features. And I'm going to point out the first design feature, which is the pathway that you see before you. This is called Ishidatami Ami, which is stone mesh grouping. And it's based on a traditional Japanese stone pavement design. When Joseph was at the Cultural Center, he noticed seniors doing craft work. And this is one of the crafts that the senior Japanese ladies make. And these are made out of recycled salmon labels. And to Joseph, this showed a sign of defiance almost, and a desire to maintain some sort of normalcy during turbulent times during the World War II, when the Japanese were interned. And he felt that the women and grandmothers wanted to keep some sort of normalcy and making things out of recycled materials for place settings or for coasters and things like that. And to this day, the seniors that are in their 90s still make these crafts, various baskets and things like that. The second design feature that was incorporated into this park are these 2 trees, one here and one located behind you. These are ume trees, and they were generously donated by 2 Japanese citizens, Sami Takahashi and Masa Hirano. The significance of these trees, these are Japanese plum trees. And Wakayama City, which is our sister city, is famous and is the highest producer of ume plums in Japan. And so we felt that this would signify our ties back to Japan. And we have the 2 of these that were transplanted from personal gardens and donated to this site. The third element of our design includes the rocks and boulders on this site. We originally wanted to find a large boulder here in BC, but our architect was looking for a very specific type and texture and color of rock. But we were able to go and find these small boulders at the Hope Slide, which is just outside of Tashme internment camp, which is located just east of Hope, BC, and was the largest internment camp during World War II. Over 2,000 Japanese Canadians were incarcerated at that camp. And so when we talked to Ryan Ellis, who was a curator at the Tashme Museum, he generously donated these rocks to this site. And it's kind of a touchstone back to the internment camps and reflects that connection. As I mentioned, the rocks and boulders were the third design feature of this memorial. And our architect searched wide and far, and he has some roots back in Ontario. So during a visit there, he visited some granite quarries and actually found this rock at a quarry in Quebec. This is called Mesabi granite, and he liked the black texture and color of this rock and the texture. And so they had this transported from Quebec back to the site. And we thought one of the symbolism that we want to portray is that, as you'll note later, some of the Japanese Canadians were sent to Ontario, as far away as Ontario, and the transportation of this boulder back from Eastern Canada symbolizes the Japanese Canadians returning. The original design of this rock shows Steveston on this first rock, and you'll see a schism. There are 2 separate rocks, but there's a schism here that shows the Japanese community being torn from this Steveston. And these sites here represent all the internment camps and self-sustaining camps that Japanese Canadians were sent to during World War II, between 1942 and 1949. And these unnamed dots were all the locations of farms in Alberta where people were sent to work on the sugar beet farms, because that was one of the options so that you could keep your families together. In fact, my family went to Alberta to work on the sugar beet farms, but eventually ended up in Winnipeg, where I was born. The last two signify what I spoke about earlier, the locations in Ontario where Japanese were actually put into prisoner of war camps. And my father-in-law was put into Angler prisoner of war camp, surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards. Even though he had done nothing wrong, this was his fate during the war. And in 1945, when the war ended, the Japanese were still not allowed to come back until 1949. And that's why we call that Freedom Day. April 1st, 1949 is Freedom Day for the Japanese Canadians. As I mentioned previously, the Japanese were allowed to return to the BC coast beginning April 1st, 1949. Not everybody returned, but for those that did, they soon assimilated back into the community. In early 1950s, there were several members of the Japanese community joined the Steveston Community Society. And at that time, they were in the midst of determining whether to build a new community center or not. The BC Packer president had ceded to donating a piece of land here to the Japanese community to build a community hall. But he approached the Japanese community and said, look, why don't we work together and build a new community center together? So our elders decided that for the betterment of the future of the children, that this was the best path forward. So they brought together all their community funds, which was a result of the sale of their property, just located to the north of this site, and donated it to the building fund, which then kick-started the construction of the first community center in Richmond, which was then the Steveston Community Center. And that became the long involvement of the Japanese community with the Steveston Community Center. And to this day, the Japanese community, all the member organizations, still sponsor the Chow Men booth on July 1st Salmon Festival. And we've been doing this since probably the late 60s, early 70s. And all the monies and proceeds from the sales of the Chow Men go towards programming here at the Steveston Community Center. I spoke about the community spirit in the Japanese community helping to build the first community center, but their community spirit and community involvement can be tracked back to their first arrival here in Steveston in the late 1800s. In 1900, the Japanese Benevolent Association built the first permanent hospital here in Richmond, just located at that site where the Maples residence is currently located. And the reason I say this was based on the principle of socialized medicine is that it was open to any person living here in Steveston, regardless of ethnicity. And so you'll find that a lot of the people here in Steveston were actually born there. Men like recently deceased Joe Bauer and Ted Lorenz and people like that were longtime community activists can trace their roots back to that hospital. The third project that I want to speak about that involved the Japanese Canadian community is the building behind me. It's called the Steveston Japanese Canadian Cultural Center. The genesis for this project was the settlement between the federal government and the Japanese Canadian community that was signed in 1988. And as part of that redress agreement, there was a community fund established. And we formed a committee here in Steveston because we felt that we felt this was one of the stronger epicenters of Japanese communities in BC, that we felt that we should get a share of that funding. So we made a presentation to the selection committee that governed the funding, and we were successful in receiving $500,000. The next step was to approach City Council to see if they would support building a facility on city property, which was unheard of in that day, and to this day. We've been the only ethnic group then and since then to be allowed to do this. And I think in part it's due to the long involvement we've had in this community in building various facilities, including helping to build Lord Byng School, the Japanese hospital I mentioned, Kuno Gardens, the cherry trees at Garrick Point, and the list goes on and on. And I think this speaks to the multicultural aspect of our living here in Steveston. And so this building was built in 1988 and has operated since then. We recently celebrated its 25th anniversary a few years ago, and that speaks to the longevity of programming here in Steveston. As mentioned previously, the partnership between the Japanese community and the Steveston Community Society started with the building of the new community center in 1957. I should mention that in exchange for the donation to that building, the community promised the Judo Club one room to be used by Judo and the gym to be used by the Kendo Club. That subsequently led to the building of the facility you see behind me, the Steveston Martial Arts Building. This idea originated in 1971 as a BC Centennial project. The person that actually put forward the idea was Councillor Jim Murray, who was an alderman on City Council at the time. But he was also a member of the Steveston Kendo Club. And in fact, he was the first Caucasian to receive his black belt or Shodan level in Canada. And so he was instrumental in having this concept passed. The Judo and Kendo clubs committed to raising funds to contribute to the building of this thing and raised about $95,000 of the total cost of construction. On the west wing houses the Judo Club, and the east wing houses Kendo. Subsequent to that, when Mayor Uchiyage from Wakayama City found out that this facility existed, he wondered why there was no karate club here. And so he sent his son Takeshi to come here and be in the Steveston Karate Club, which exists to this day. And the three clubs share this facility. To me, this is one of the landmark buildings here in Richmond for the community to enjoy. As part of the Steveston Salmon Festival held every year on July 1st, we host a Japanese cultural show. This has been going on since the early 1970s and highlights the Japanese culture here in Steveston. I'm pleased to have join us today Mrs. Chiyoko Hirano of the Tatsumi Blue Dance Troupe. Chiyoko, for many, many years, I think over 25 years, actually was the chair of the Japanese Cultural Show and helped bring it to its present iteration that's housed here in the Martial Arts Building in the Japanese Cultural Center every July 1st. I'm also pleased to recognize that Chiyoko recently received the 2021 City of Richmond Cultural Leadership Award for many years in promoting Japanese dance or odori. Chiyoko, maybe you can speak to your memories of past cultural shows held here at the Steveston Salmon Festival and what maybe stands out for you the most.
Well, I started helping another person when they had the culture show here for Salmon Festival. And from then on, after 2 years, my husband and I took over organizing the culture show here. At the beginning, it was very hard because we had to start from scratch. We didn't have any budget to buy papers and everything to cover the tables and walls. So that was very hard at first. But as we went on each year, more people came to watch the show and then got interested in it, and we were able to share to many people our Japanese culture. And people who were demonstrating and displaying, they start enjoying getting together and look forward to July the 1st demonstrations, putting on the displays and demonstrations. So that kind of got me interested more each year. And in no time, it was almost 25 years. So that was one place that I found it the most interesting was that I didn't realize some of the people didn't really know too much about Japanese culture. Steveston being a very Japanese, people, a lot of Japanese people live here, but there are people who didn't really understand or know the Japanese culture. So when I had the comic book made one year, they really appreciated the culture and learned how beautiful it is.
And why do you think it's important to share our Japanese culture with everybody else?
It was important for me to pass on this beautiful culture, our culture, to the younger generations. So that kind of kept me going each year to moderate it and to improve it, and then make it easier and make it more interesting for the younger generation to really appreciate and understand the Japanese culture. The children who have never been to Japan and really see the actual or get involved in Japanese culture, they start to really learn about the Japanese culture through the watching the beautiful displays and demonstrations and mingling with the older people who could introduce the older type of Japanese culture. So that really was very important for me.
Chiyoko was responsible for setting the stage for the current version of the Japanese cultural show that people can see every July 1st. And within this building, which is the Kendo Hall, we normally have displays of bonsai, ikebana, calligraphy, and we also have a stage show where Chiyoko's dance troupe performs. We have koto performances and other Japanese cultural demonstrations. In the other wing, which houses the Judo Club, we have demonstrations of martial arts, including Judo, Kendo, and Karate. And in the Japanese Cultural Center that I introduced you to earlier, we have displays of Japanese dolls. We have our Japanese seniors selling their crafts that they work on year-round. And I think some of the crafts I mentioned during our tour of the Steveston Nikkei Memorial. And so there's a variety of activities and demonstrations people can come here on July 1st to enjoy. And after that, we'll actually show you some demonstrations of martial arts, including Kendo, Judo, and Karate that presently operate out of this facility.
My name is Ray Morale, and I am the head instructor of the Steveston Kendo Club. So Kendo, for those many over here that don't know, is the martial art of Japanese fencing. It's one of the main martial arts of Japan, mainly because it has its roots to the Japanese samurai. So from the samurai, as they would practice, obviously you can't practice with real swords, so they made wooden replicas as well as armor to protect themselves while they practice. This Kendo Club is one of the oldest, I believe the oldest within North America. It was first started by a Japanese immigrant came over and started the club roughly 1913, 1914. Kendo has been part of the cultural show at the Salmon Festival since the 70s. And what we like to do is just put on a short demonstration of essentially what happens within the Kendo Club. One of the things I do like to show a lot is the discipline in terms of bowing, showing respect to your peer or your opponent or your instructor that's in front of you. Hopefully that in itself will show the general public a little bit of what we do.
My name is Jim Yuzuru Kojima. My role in the Steveston Judo Club is as a senior instructor here to try to promote judo to the young children. I've been involved since 1953, consecutively for 68 years. In 1928, the Steveston Judo Club first started out. In 1941 December, it was disbanded. And then 1953, 10 judo black belts that were fishermen started the club up again. The sport of judo was started by Jigoro Kano. Jigoro Kano was a small man from Kobe, but he wanted to do something to contribute to the world in terms of a sport. And so he started doing jiu-jitsu, and then he modified jiu-jitsu into a safe sport called judo. And that was started in 1882 in Tokyo. The sign is a very, very precious item for judoists, and it was written by the founder of judo, Jigoro Kano. And in 1938, Jigoro Kano, who was an IOC member, they had a meeting in Cairo, Egypt. And in Cairo, Egypt that year, they had said that judo would be included in the 1940 Olympics, which was to be held in Tokyo, Japan. But on the way home, he went from Halifax to Vancouver. When he was here, he went to the Vancouver Judo Club and the Steveston Judo Club. He wrote two of these calligraphies, Arse Tsumereba Kanarazu Tasu, which means if you work hard and you persevere, you will attain your goals. On the way home from Seattle, Kano Sensei passed away. And so we have either the last one or the second last one. We don't know where the other one is. So we're really fortunate because many judokas from Japan come here and they want to get their picture taken under his calligraphy.
The Steveston Karate Club was founded in 1973. Back in 1971 and 1972, Mayor Ujita of Wakayama City sent delegations to Richmond before they became sister cities. When these delegations returned to Japan, they reported to Mayor Ujita that there was a martial arts center with only kendo and judo. When Mayor Ujita found out about this, he sent a letter to Mayor Anderson of Richmond asking to also put in a karate club. In April of 1973, Sensei Takeshi Uchiage, by request of Mayor Ujita, came to Steveston to start a karate club. By July of 1973, Richmond and Wakayama City became sister cities, with Steveston now having a kendo, judo, and karate club, all in the Steveston Martial Arts Center.
My name is Yuki Mori. I've been with the Steveston Karate Club since 2011, so around 10 years. Karate originated in Okinawa, Japan, and it's a self-defense sport, which is more close-range fighting. At the Steveston Salmon Festival on July 1st, we usually start with the history of our club and how it originated, and we'll do the basics and some kata, which is form, and kumite, which is some sparring. And due to the COVID-19 this year, we're unable to do some contact sports. I've been in the provincial and national team member, and it's really exciting because I've been able to meet lots of people around the country and even outside the country.
1, 2,